Hey, how you doing? From the streets of Kansas, the frozen heart of America. Urgh. Look what it did overnight. It started on my drive into work as I was ranting and raving about the Civil War. Oh, brr. We've pretty much gone, all the TV stations have gone wall to wall on coverage of the snow. But it doesn't, overnight I was watching it on a virtual Railfan train cam, the Doc Caboose camera in the West Bottoms, and it looked pretty heavy, but now that I see it, it doesn't look like it snowed that much. Maybe it's heavier in some other spots. I think the kids' school has been, well, at least in school has been, is off. And nowadays they've discovered with virtual learning, with the pandemic, that instead of calling school off, they just tell the kids at school will be virtual. My experience with that, at least among elementary kids, is that virtual school is like no school at all. They get very little value out of it. A lot of kids are too distractible without having an adult presence to keep them on track. And a lot of teachers haven't quite learned that you don't send the kids to things like YouTube or stuff like that. Because, we found that a big part of their lesson plan was to give them links to other sites on the internet. Go watch this YouTube video. And so I would ask our kids what they've been doing all day, and I was keeping track of them, and they'd pull this story. Well, the teacher said I need to go to YouTube, and then 4 hours later they're still on YouTube on the same assignment. Well, the video they're watching has nothing to do with their assignment. They just went on YouTube and they maybe watched their assignment, which may have taken all of 10 minutes, and now they've discovered one link after another, and next thing you know, they're watching something about candy, or they're singing along with, but a good many of them are, and when teachers do lesson plans, they need to learn how to use Dropbox. And here you go. Here's a little attachment with everything you need to know for today's lesson, including the videos that I've included in this Dropbox. Just download them and watch them. Because kids are very good at finding the most malevolent things in the world, and they'll go out and play with them. I call it the baby bird syndrome. baby birds, when they leave the nest and they start learning how to fly for the first time, they can't really fly. I've watched them do it. They see a cat coming along and they'll walk right up to the cat thinking it's a friend. It's kind of too bad that the snow seems to be done. I was hoping to be able to drive in it a little because it's kind of beautiful to watch as you're driving. Although most people don't like driving in it. This is my day that I usually drive up Main Street in Kansas City. I'm still shivering even though the car heat is starting to kick in. Maybe if I turn off the froster, it'll warm up the car. Put it on auto. I'll do this at least until the windshield starts fogging up. I'm right back on. I was really, for whatever reason, I was really tired. I think it was the weather. When I left home, I was really unmotivated. And I've noticed that when there's a low pressure system close by, I can be really unmotivated. I have to really kind of kick myself to get myself going. So I was unmotivated. I walked out of the house. I made myself a nice cup of tea, hot tea, and put my ice water in my flask as usual and walked right out of the house without it. Got to work and I was like, oh, I left my my tea and water in the car, and I went to the car. Nope, I didn't even put it in the car. Damn. Because as unmotivated as I was, I could have used a little bit of that caffeine boost from. Although the tea from tea bags that I make is pretty darn weak. I can see the road conditions are something to be desired here. Pretty slick. I guess it snowed enough. Ruh-roh. Oops. Yep, looks like almost all the snow is east of here, moving away from us. It looks like, according to my traffic map, there's an accident 70 westbound on the southwest corner of the downtown loop. had, on days when there's weather, there's a lot of time spent on people driving around reporting on the weather, so there isn't as much to edit. So to kill time, I put something I've been curious about. I saw a little bit of it the other day, and I wanted to, for some reason I was thinking about them, this band from Sweden. It's actually two sisters. Let me think of their name. I always do this. I start talking, and then it's on the tip of my tongue, and they have a funny name. It's called First Aid Kit. And they're an odd band in that they play folk Americana type, almost like this countrified folk, but they are Swedish, from Stockholm. And what's even odder is that when you talk to them, they speak English like Americans, even with an accent, an American accent. They don't have a Swedish accent at all. And so I was doing a little bit of research on them on the Wikipedias, and they started out not knowing English at all when they were little, and they had to learn English. But it said something about they attended an English language school, so maybe they got immersed so much in English and it's an American accent. I mean, usually when learn English, if they have an accent at all, it's usually an English accent. So if you talk to these girls, you wouldn't think they were Swedish. Other than, I guess, they sort of look Swedish. I don't know how you would say somebody looks Swedish, but to me they kind of have that look. And but their music is tremendous. They have a lot of really good songs, and they're pretty young. They've only been doing this for 11 years or so, and have had great success with their music. But they sing in 2-3-part harmony. I know I said it's like two sisters. Well, the third part harmony usually comes from one of their accompanying musicians. I think I'm going to have to do what that guy did and run this light, because this is the streetcar light. It's a light that works with it, and I bet you there's the snow on the tracks is shorting out the light. There's a streetcar there. It's a light that works when the streetcar is crossing the street, so that they can cross it without fear of being broadsided. But yeah, I'm really knocked out by their music. And they have one of the videos. Their videos are like live videos, performance videos, and one of them was shot here in Kansas City at the bridge. The bridge is the format radio station. A lot of AAA format radio stations have started on the left end of the dial, meaning that they are usually related to National Public Radio. Like a lot of National Public Radio stations have branched out into having a AAA format offering. Minneapolis has that. Theirs is called The Current, and I usually listen to that. I listen to that one at night, and a lot of times I listen to the bridge when I'm in the car, although I haven't been lately because I've been doing all this live streaming stuff, and I can't be playing music while live streaming. And the bridge is actually older than the Current. The Current is arguably a bigger, more well-known station. The bridge is older. Like they're celebrating their 20th anniversary, I believe, this year. So what, 1991 to 2001? And before they were the bridge, I used to go hang out. They were KCMW. Is that right? I knew some of the DJs pretty well when I worked at KMOS down in Warrensburg. That's where I got my start, was KMOS. And I started listening to KCMW back when they had their alternative shows on. They had an pretty good alternative music program about how often a week? I think it was once a week. Maybe it was more than that. And then I remember they had a show called Fiddling Around with Rex Brown, which was a bluegrass show, and I used to love to listen to that one. It was on Sunday mornings. And Rex Brown is an interesting character in that he was a university janitor who just had a tremendous collection and loved bluegrass, and he came in and learned how to do it, and had his own show on the station. But for the most part, that station back then played what I called white jazz, which was jazz that didn't really have any jazz to it. It was like elevator music. And there were a couple of guys who were, and I used to talk to them too, and the thing about them is they were hardcore Christians. Well, you guys are doing a really good job with this alternative show. You should do it more. And the one guy said, "No, we prefer not to. We rather just do a lot of this jazz." And and a lot of our listeners are the businesses in the mid-central Missouri area, and they like the music to be low key. And I'm like, well, yeah, basically you're playing elevator music, and it was no wonder to me that they were having a real hard time with their pledge drives, because I don't think most anybody else wanted to hear that. And bridge in 2003, that was when my wife had come at the end of 2002 from the Philippines, and she got a job in Warrensburg at the hospital there in the lab, and we lived at the time in Kansas City, so it was a really long drive. But we got a place in Bates City, which was 33 miles drive for me one way and 36-mile drive for her the other way. So it was right in between, but it was still a long drive for both of us. And she eventually got a job here in Kansas City, and we got it. But when she started that job, it was 2003, and I turned on the radio station, and there was this station playing pretty good music, and I really like. It was kind of refreshing. It was we're Casey. What? I can't remember the call letters of the bridge now. I think they may have stayed with KCMW for a little while. I'm not sure of that, but then they called themselves the Bridge, which was kind of funny because there was this old bridge on the abandoned part of Highway 13 that a lot of people like to go to and hang out, and love that spot. So every time I think of the station, the bridge, I think of that bridge in Warrensburg. And the station was and is still based out of Warrensburg, although it isn't based out of Warrensburg. It's based here in Kansas City. The station was given over to the PBS station here. So we have a national public radio station, KCUR, and then we have the PBS-owned AAA station, The Bridge. So it's kind of an city. The first couple of years, I think, were a little bit rough for that station. They had a kind of a limited playlist, actually. And that was actually the criticism of the Current, too. When we discovered the Current in 2005, the year that they started in Minneapolis, we went on a trip up there. Was it 2005? Maybe it was 2007 we went up there. But I was like, oh man, these guys are actually playing punk rock on the radio, on mainstream FM radio, and a good mix, and they had a lot of local music. And then I listened to them for a while, and it was like, yeah, they're kind of playing a lot of the same stuff over and over again. A lot of it's sort of dance music, which I don't care about. And The Bridge was sort of the same way in the early years. It kind of had like this very limited playlist. They were playing the crap out of certain artists, and I didn't quite care about those artists, and they kind of ran into the ground. And then there was, and sometimes they still do this, the classic rock cuts, quote unquote, making air quotes, where something that I just think the mainstream radio is already run into the ground and ruined. And last week I discovered something new about my wife. I guess I knew this, but I forgotten it. She was a huge fan of the Bee Gees, and she loved disco music. And I was like, oh man, disco sucks. I hate disco and I hate the Bee Gees. And she's like, oh, I love that band. How could you hate them? And I said, well, so that Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, which they had, I guess they had 5 songs on it. She made a movie based around this whole album that the Bee Gees made, which fully was in love with and embraced the disco movement in the late 70s. When we were driving up from Louisiana to come move to Missouri in one of the worst winter storms ever, what was on the radio? Bee Gees, Bee Gees, Bee Gees. And I mean, hearing the same songs over and over again. That you tried switching the dial in the truck, and I swear it'd be a Bee Gees song. You'd switch a dial to 2 other stations, it would be the same damn Bee Gees song playing at the same time. That's how bad it was. And really, really, I never thought the music was that great to begin with. Now, maybe you hear it the first time or so, you might like it, but by the 1000th time, you are so damn sick of it. It was not even funny. It was oversaturated. And then we were watching this documentary about the Bee Gees, which I found kind of interesting, actually. And they said, well, back in the 70s, a lot of radio stations had extremely limited playlists. I'm like, yes, I know. That was sad that they had the very limited playlists. It was so bad, people were reaching for the oldies left and right. And turn the defroster on the windshield. People were reaching for anything other than trying to listen to radio stations back in the... People think, oh, the 70s was a great time for music. Well, they may have been playing great music somewhere, but they weren't playing it on the radio stations. And then they talked about pretty much the downfall of the Bee Gees because they embraced disco so hard and disco embraced them. And then the downfall of disco, which I had never thought about. And I actually kind of felt ashamed about this part. See, disco actually originated with the liberation of the gay movement, and it originated in a lot of clubs where a lot of gay men hung out. And so it infused R&B music with with pop music to come up with disco. They called it disco. And by 78, 79, after the success of the Bee Gees, disco was overdone and it was made very cheap. And to hear this one guy get on and talk passionately about the movement and how it really was artistic and special in many ways, and in the early days, and how it just went downhill really quickly when everybody got on board, and and you had all these silly songs and disco this and disco that and disco everything. So this DJ out of Chicago started saying disco sucks, and he'd wear a helmet because part of his shtick was to smash disco records over his head. And I guess his head was getting pretty sore, so he wore a helmet to do it. And he started the disco sucks movement. Only problem with that is, and I fully agree, that disco did suck in the late 70s. It got bad. But the only problem is they had a big thing like that. But they had a disco sucks night, and it got so rowdy that they had to forfeit the next game because the field wasn't ready, and they were going to burn a bonfire of disco records and light off fireworks and everything with the disco records burning, and they were going to explode them and everything else like that. And then the narrator said, but the only problem was most of the records that they were burning were not disco. They were R&B records by black artists, and most of the artists that were in that pile were black artists. Then you begin to understand, hey, this isn't about hating disco or dance music. This was about racism. And then I remembered 1983, maybe it was 81. Not long after that, this artist out of Minneapolis was getting a lot of airplay, and people really liked him. He called himself Prince. And one of a big group of people who liked him was the Rolling Stones. Invited Prince and his group to open for the Rolling Stones in California, which they did, and it was a disaster. And it was a disaster because they got up there and started playing their music, and all these rock and roll types started screaming and shouting the N-word at them and get off our stage and stop playing that black music. We don't like it. And I'm like, yeah, we have a name for those type of people now. We call them Camaro heads. And there are a lot of people who are still like that from that era, who still listen to the same crappy music, have the same crappy attitudes, and drive the same crappy cars, usually Camaros. They can usually be distinguished with their haircut, which is the mullet, which is short in the front and the sides and long in the back. So they'd say party in the back and business in the front. It became identified with a certain type of person, a certain level of intelligence, and and it doesn't have to be that way, but yeah. So now I'm like, revisiting my stance on disco, that there were some good songs that came out of that. There's some memorable songs, but they got buried in the crap because when people get greedy and they take it, they run things into the ground. They try and squeeze every dime they can out of it, and they don't care what they're doing, if they're going to destroy something or... I mean, really, all disco ever was a mixing of pop music, danceable R&B music. Well, this snow isn't really super slick type of snow. It's more of a, I don't know. I could see it on the video. It was big honking snowflakes of snow. As far as the music goes, though, I like my reaction to disco, which was punk rock. And if I'm revisiting music from the late 70s, it's the old school punk rock. And then there was this thing, a video on cult films, and I noticed big and heavy in that is the Rocky Horror Picture